I shared with those of you who were here right at the beginning that we are trialing a new platform for our webinar today. So that means that we are, we're finding our way as we go. So hopefully it'll all go to plan, but please do use the chat, use the Q&A. I've already seen a couple of people put things in chat, so I know that's working. And please contribute, ask questions, and we'll pause to answer those as we go through. So welcome to Paul. I'm just going to ask you for a second, Paul, just to introduce yourself, just to tell me a bit about you and introduce the company that you work for as well. Try again.
I think I was removed from the call for your lovely intro, so I was waving frantically to be let back in. So apologies. So yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I will give some location context first, because I just want to caveat that I'm in one of our studios in Salford in Greater Manchester, and so this is quite a bold background, I think, for a call like this. But yeah, thank you for having us on. I'm from a company called Audio Always, which is one of the UK's leading audio production companies. We make audio in its many forms, but primarily radio shows for partners like the BBC. We work on podcasts for people like Audible and Amazon and the BBC. Plus, we have a network of our own kind of original content. And we also do a lot of work in the audiobook space, working with partners like Penguin and Bloomsbury and Hachette and HarperCollins on audiobooks for them. Proudly based in the northwest of England, based out of Salford, but also with teams in Birmingham and studios and teams in London as well. And my role as business development director focuses on new opportunities and growth with our existing opportunities, be that new podcast launches, be that new partners to work with, be that new tech as the tech world opens up to audio. But I also have quite a diverse team below me that maybe aren't quite aligned with the day-to-day of my focus. From I oversee the video production team, the marketing and commercial team, and the audio production teams as well. So there's a diverse mix of people in my universe, as well as kind of an oversight role as well.
Okay. Fantastic. So we'll delve into a lot more of some of the things that you touched on there as we get into this conversation. And as we do within these webinars, it is going to be a conversation. So I'm not going to really use slides. And actually, if what just happened, if you being kicked off the screen by me launching a slide means that's a definite reason not to use slides. But yeah, we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to ask you some kind of questions to delve a bit more into what you've shared, and I'm going to also share some of the experiences that I've had, all to help those of you who are either watching live now or listening back to this to just start to do some thinking about the role that leadership teams play, and maybe your roles within that if you are part of a leadership team, but also what the link is and how leadership teams can really support the rest of their organizations to thrive and to succeed. And why this matters really is a topic. We often use a stat that was a part of a Gallup research survey, which was thousands of different people were interviewed as part of this, and it was all about what helps people to be engaged at work. And this stat attributed 70% of a team's engagement directly to their immediate line manager. So when we say engagement, we mean things like, how motivated they are, how likely they are to stay and be loyal to an organization, how much discretionary effort they put in, and all of which ultimately impacts the bottom line. And so if we're thinking about the leadership team, those individuals who manage other managers, there's a cumulative effect here, and that makes this the effectiveness of that role even more key, even more critical. So let's just start with setting the scene around what we mean by a leadership team. So we've already defined that as this group of individuals that are responsible for managing other managers. But what else is involved within that? What's, in your view, the role of a leadership team beyond financial performance, Paul?
I suppose it's so interesting, and I'm fresh out of a leadership meeting that finished at 1:30, so it's very front of mind at the moment. I suppose the thing that I'm always trying to do, and I chair our leadership meetings at Audio Always, is to try and make sure that there is a skew in those meetings towards the strategic focus of where we're trying to get to. And I think it's trying to recognize that as a business, the day-to-day is well covered. We know that there are people who are making the radio shows we produce. They're producing the podcast. They have people managers, or as we would call them, exec producers, overseeing their day-to-days. And so the leadership meetings and leadership teams should have the space to think 2, 3, 6, 12 months beyond. It's about trying, and it's so easy, isn't it? You get dragged into this day-to-day issue with a member of one team or a challenging proposal that you're working on. But it's trying to make sure that the conversations we're having are looking into the middle or long distance and trying to go, where do we want the business to be in that time? And I suppose that's about, that is financial a lot of the time. We're looking at revenue, we're looking at profit. It is around the work and the space of work we want to do. It's about the partners we want to be working with, and it's about the culture of the business. And we have gone from a team of 20 to a team of 50 over a relatively short period of time, which is still, a small to medium business, but that growth comes with its own growing pains. And so it's about trying to make sure that we are thinking long term for the benefit of everyone in our teams as much as possible.
So it's balancing that, knowing and having the confidence and the ability to step away from some of that operational day-to-day and creating space and focus time for looking ahead, for thinking about what's coming up, for those new markets that we might want to become part of, for where we want to get to as an organization. And I agree with all of that. I think that bit about where do we need to innovate, what's our vision, where are we trying to get to, is the bit that really defines the purpose of a leadership team. But I think one of the things that I really find interesting here when we think about the role of a leadership team and working within a leadership team is this assumption that we might make that we're all clear on what it entails to be part of a leadership team. And for those of you who might be on this call who, well, it doesn't matter if you're part of a leadership team or you're just part of a team in general, if I asked you, are you absolutely explicitly clear on what is expected of you in that role? Because so often we don't necessarily know the answers to that, or the question that we so often don't know the answer to is, how will I measure success in this role? And how do we measure the success of a leadership team is really challenging. And I think within an organization, we're going to talk a lot about clarity and alignment, and how a role of a leadership team is to create real clarity for where the business is going. But even if there is a small gap in that alignment at that level, or you've got individuals who maybe aren't as clear on what's expected, that can have huge impacts for the rest of the organization. So when we work with leadership teams, we do quite a lot of work up front around helping them to really define what the role of a leadership team is, or their leadership team. And I ask questions such as, why do you exist? Who do you serve? How will you know you've been successful? What are our priorities? All of the things to actually, before we can do anything else, get clear on what our role actually is. So if you can't answer some of those questions, that's probably where some of the work starts. So we kind of think about what the role of a leadership team is. What about the main differences for you to being part of a leadership team versus being solely a people manager or a team leader?
Yeah, and when we were preparing for this moment, we had a really interesting conversation around the lack of the lesson that you need to know what to do when you take that step up. You know, it's not something that you learn in school. It's very rarely part of what you learn as you go through a business. You like many people, my journeys have been, and I was a hands-on creative in a radio station. I then moved to a role that had a bit more of a commercial focused, and so my skills built me up to be in a senior role, but there was maybe less of that kind of education piece of what are you expected to be able to do day to day. You know, the differences that I look at are around that kind of the space to be able to be hands-on starts to disappear as you head into a leadership team, and being really comfortable that someone else is getting there. And it's my job to set the end destination, but it probably isn't my job anymore, much to my frustration some days, to set the route of how we're going to get there. And being really comfortable with that discomfort, that when someone goes, I'm going to do it this way, you go, oh, well, you might still find the end result. You've just got to step back and let that happen, because otherwise you're not trusting the people below you to crack on. And I say to any new starters in my team, you will come into contact with me most when there is something amazing that needs celebrating, and I will be your ultimate champion, or when something's gone really badly wrong and I need to step in and help you solve a big problem. But I shouldn't really be involved in that middle ground in between, whereas the people managers in my team are much closer aligned with the producers and the assistant producers and the video editors that work alongside them, and it is their job to kind of help guide the route, and it is their job to also get a bit more credit for the work, because they've probably been a bit more hands-on. So there is that separation that you start to lose the hands-on to give you space, hopefully, to look longer term. But it's a really difficult challenge, because I don't think it's very hard to give yourself permission to do that. And it's very hard to know that it's okay for you not to know what X person is doing on a Tuesday afternoon, but actually you're going to be better in a leadership role if you have no idea what everyone is not doing on a Tuesday afternoon.
It's like, it's that kind of age-old kind of tension, isn't it? And a lot of it comes down to our own mindset and the own expectations that we put on ourselves. You know, is it my role to be all over everything, have all of the answers, be able to fix any challenge that gets thrown at me? Or is it my role to support others to deliver what they need to deliver? And you talked a lot there about this idea of the how. You know, we might set the what in terms of the strategic objective, but how get there, letting go of being able to dictate, or that's a horrible word to use, but, you know, define what the how is, can be really uncomfortable. And we're going to talk a bit in a moment about some of the tensions, but I think we're already starting to introduce, there's this inherent tension that exists when we are ultimately responsible for the success of a business and the success of its direction and its long-term, you know, how much it can endure in the long term. But we have to let go of the day-to-day accountability for how things are done, and that's really tricky.
And isn't there like something here about that kind of you have to retrain yourself, or I find I had to retrain myself on how I got my own gratification within a business or in a role.
Yeah.
And so when you are at lower levels of a business, you're more likely to have to go, well done on that piece of work, or that was great, and you get that every couple of days. But then as you step up, you probably get that once a month or once a quarter, because you're not seen, or also you shouldn't be taking the glory of all the people who've done the legwork. So you're one step removed, and I think sometimes it feels safer and more rewarding to stay in the day-to-day. But you almost have to tear yourself away from that to have the space.
It's almost like you kind of turn on your laptop, start the day, and there's two routes that you can go down when you're in more of a strategic leadership role. And one is, right, I'm going to think about all of this long-term planning, or kind of, you know, all of the things we've talked about so far. I'm going to consider where the new opportunity might be that we want to grab hold of in the next year or 2 years. Or the other one is, I'm going to see how that project that I was delivering 2-3 years ago is doing, are the safest place to go and the most comfortable place to go is, I'll just dip into that project, because the other bit is the unknown. It's the blank page, it's the opportunity.
Yeah.
And so just noticing that discomfort and that real human pull to want to stay sometimes where we know we can do what's required.
And I think, you know, I've had a period this year where we've had quite a lot of change. We had one of our people managers took a sabbatical to go traveling. And then there was another change at leadership level, which meant another team moved into my world. And it was all happening during a really busy period. So I had to be more hands-on for a while. I had to spend more time doing day-to-day conversations. I had to know what was going on in people's world. And that was what the business needed me to do in that moment. But I think you've got to do that knowing how you exit that. You've got to carve out the time to be thinking about what the solution to that is going to be, and be framing it all the time to those people you're working with as a this is what I want you to do in the short term, but I'll let you know what the long term is, because otherwise everyone just starts to rely on you. Quickly go from having 5-6 people that you need to be touching, having a touch point with on a weekly basis, to having 20, and then you can't get out of that. So you've got to kind of go in to those periods knowing how you can get out of them almost, and also knowing, and I can feel it now, that when you do less of the long-term planning, you've got to put a bit more energy into that when you get out of that period, because you're playing catch up, because you've not thought about what it looks like in Q4.
And so it's that intentionality of this is what I'm doing and this is why, as opposed to just falling into it. And I think, you know, if we kind of go back to that question around the main differences to being a people manager, I think this we go through various different transitions in our careers, and the one that we focus in on a lot is the one when you move from being an individual contributor to being a manager of people. So I know this from personal experience. It's one of the reasons that I do what I do now, from that real buzz that you get from adding value to suddenly delivering through other people. And often when you're in that role, you're also balancing delivery too. And we're talking here about another really big transition, and likely not a transition that happens in one go, a transition that probably happens gradually over a period of time. But it's that move from operational management leadership to more strategic, and it's that focus that's on, as opposed to the day-to-day, on the future, as opposed to one function, it's on across the whole business. And we're often promoted across every one of the different transitions that we make in our careers because of our success in our previous role. And actually, it's those skills aren't necessarily the ones that are going to give us success in the new one. So it's thinking about, you know, when we move to being a manager of managers, we're going through another really big transition in how we need to see our role, how we need to consider the value and reframe how we add value in all of those different aspects. So if we think about your route into this role, then will you share a bit more about, you said before about kind of, you know, coming from being within the creative industry, will you share a bit more with us about your route to this role, and in particular maybe how prepared you felt to be part of a leadership team?
Yeah, I suppose you know, my career has seen me be very hands-on, making, you know, very few people get into radio or audio as a sector wanting to be a manager of people. You want to make the content, right? You want to be the creative person, and it happens in many sectors. You want to you start by training to do the hands-on job, and like many sectors, you know, growth in a business is often tied to an organizational chart, rather than being, you know, it's hard to grow your career with the same job title or moving within similar kind of creative roles. It does happen. I kind of left the day-to-day radio and went into a more sales role, working for an international company that sold creative production. And that was the role where I really started to learn the people manager skills. Though I do remember when I first got that role, I did have the word manager in my job title. And my manager at the time said, just to be very clear, you are not a manager of people. I think he very much felt I shouldn't get above my station by being an account manager. I was very much manager of a sale, not a people. But over time, you grow a team and you oversee a team. And I think because of, you know, I've always enjoyed being very hands-on with working with a team and growing that role as a people manager. I left that business with a team of 6 or 7 people who were reporting into me, but wasn't in the kind of senior leadership team. But when I joined Audio Always, that was where the kind of role fell. And I probably came because of the commercial background of the sales role with a bit more financial knowledge than a lot of the other people that I sat alongside. But you know, that adjustment is really interesting because you suddenly go from being responsible for hitting your own targets to helping the business grow beyond the targets that you've already agreed, and you're much more responsible. And so we work really closely to kind of clarify what that is and what that job is as a leadership team. And we have an interesting challenge that we're all leadership team, but we are also all company directors. And so my role as chair is to really distinguish between those two kind of spaces. And a lot of the work that I did alongside colleagues was to build a framework for expectations of the leadership team, to make sure we knew what goes in what meetings, what is our expectations of each other, what should we come to those meetings prepared by. And I think that did make it easier because there was a kind of shared language of how we were all going to work together. You know, one of my biggest fears is to be in a room and feel like you don't know, you're not performing at the level that everyone else is. So you haven't had the ability to do that. But I think that shift between people manager to leadership, I feel like that's taken me 3 years to be really comfortable with. And I spent a lot of time just defaulting to the day-to-day, just trying to help out people when they had a problem. But what I realized was that wasn't helping them in the longer term. So I needed to have that space. But I probably have a lot of the kind of soft skills that a lot of people managers focus on, the kind of being able to have a positive impact on someone's day, being able to understand their personal challenges as much as their work challenges. And so I try and be as present as possible, even though I'm in a leadership role. So I may not be responsible for someone's day-to-day work, but I'll make sure I'm in the office 2 or 3 days a week. Because then at the very least, if someone's in, I can just lean across the desk and go, oh, I saw you at the Girls Aloud concert last week. How was that? And that just builds that kind of positive culture around the business. I've talked at real length there. I'm not sure that any of that answered the question you asked me, but hopefully it was good context.
It was. I'm slightly distracted by wanting to say to Lindsay afterwards, we're in the wrong game if we're talking to our colleagues about seeing each other at the Girls Aloud concert. But I'll move away from that distraction. So I suppose I'm hearing in what you're saying, this evolution and this moving around, which I think a lot of us can relate to within our careers, finding something that we're interested in and then getting looking for an opportunity that allows us to do a bit more of that. I've also heard you talk quite a lot there around your route to feeling maybe more comfortable in the role that you're in now is in large part finding your way, being conscious of the things that pull you back into the day-to-day, but also creating structures and frameworks and clarity, which you can all across your leadership team use to focus in on. And I'm going to read out some questions as they come in, but one of the questions that's just come up is, how did you learn to make that shift? Did you have a mentor or a role model that you learned from when making that shift from being a manager of people to managing and leading an organization, member of a leadership team?
I think you learn a lot from your peers. You see what your peers are doing, and sometimes that's about copying best practice. That's sometimes realizing the challenges they're facing and wanting to give yourself space to avoid that. We've gone through a bit of a restructure process that's really clarified those roles, that really helped with that. But I think it's also just about being curious. I spend a lot of time, I'm not a fan. I work in podcasting, but I'm not a fan of a high performance podcast per se. But I am interested in seeing articles in this space, looking at other organizational charts, speaking to peers in other companies and understanding how they build their workday. How do they spend their time? And particularly when we evolved into being a board of directors alongside a leadership team, I spent a lot of time reading around board structures and the expectations of the board and the responsibility of the board. And so probably a marker like that, where you take on even more responsibility, does force your hand a little bit. Like, I know I can't deliver that bit of my role now unless I make sure I step back and focus on it.
So it's that kind of using the peers and the role models around you, but also getting that external perspective, whether that be from other organisations, from things that have been written or are being discussed, to help you find. And I'm probably bringing some of my experience into this, but I kind of relate very much to what you're saying. And I think it was about helping me to find my way of doing it. So as opposed to going out and with the intention of finding a cheat sheet of this is the role that you need to fulfill when you're part of a strategic leadership team, it is this is what others do, what feels authentic and I was going to say comfortable, not comfortable in that I can just relax, but what feels authentic and true to the style that I bring as well, and that's right for this organisation. So, I talk, I said at the very beginning that I was going to share why this topic is so interesting for me, and I talk really openly in all of the work that I do with teams and with individuals about the various transitions that I made in my career and the impact that had on me, and how at the time when I was moving into my first management role, when I was moving into more of a leadership team and up to senior leadership team level within executive leadership team level within big organizations, that each time I made a transition, I felt this real discomfort. And I now recognize that discomfort as being a very human and natural part of learning and trying and new things and using new skills, or building new skills. At the time, I would interpret those as being a measure of my capability. So it being that actually that discomfort means that maybe I'm not up for this role, and internalizing that. And I definitely felt that when I was part of a strategic leadership team for the first time. And I remember looking around the table and knowing that I'd been promoted through a recruitment process into this role, but looking around the table and thinking everybody else has got, knows exactly what's expected of them. The reality, probably not. But I think there are two really important factors here in making that transition. One is that we do get the support to explore and think about and be really clear on what is expected, even if we believe that we should know, to be able to demystify and let go of any assumptions. And that allows us to then think about what we need to do differently in how we approach it, but also that permission to learn. I heard you say earlier, you've got more comfortable with the discomfort. It's almost that permission to learn and how we interpret that discomfort. We know that as adults, we learn through experience, but that also means that we're not always going to get it right. And being able to be okay that doesn't mean we're not up for the task. It's just us learning how to do it.
And if you had hired a new person into your business, or you had just promoted someone into a new role, you would expect them to need training to fulfill that role. But somehow it's so easy to forget to give yourself that permission. And every one of those moves is doing exactly the thing. And you know, that line around the comfort and the discomfort is something that you know, I think I've had to really lean into. It's the permission almost to not be across the day-to-day. It's the permission to ask questions that you may feel in the moment are stupid or naive, but you need to know the answer to. It's the permission to build something in your own image, right? And you talked a bit about authenticity before. I do it my way a little bit, and I'm really kind of happy with that. But yeah, that kind of comfort with discomfort, I think, is something that is one of the things that you don't have straight away, but I think you have to really lean into as you get more focused on the leadership team angle.
And another question that's just come in, you know, we've talked quite a bit about the shifts we might need to make. What are some of the risks if we don't make those shifts? You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you know, it's not an easy time to do business. You know, everyone I speak to recognizes the challenge of, you know, the cost of living crisis is a cost of business crisis. The you know, rising salaries, you know, with staff retention, being able to find new opportunities when the businesses you're working for are also facing those same challenges that you are. And you know, I think that the risk for me so often is that you find yourself not in the next day or the day after, but you find yourself having difficult conversations 3 months later or 6 months later, because you haven't given yourself the time 3 months earlier to look ahead and work out what's around the corner, or at least make an active choice about how you're going to be in control of the business. It's so easy to live in a world of being responsive and firefighting and problem solving, and you end the day and you go, I've had a really busy day and I've done a good job today because I solved that problem for that person. But I hold heavily that sense that it's my job to make sure that I'm avoiding the 6-month problem rather than the tomorrow problem. And that probably, you know, that feels quite profound to say. I'm certainly not someone that sits with that pressure weighing on me, but I very clearly understand that that's my responsibility to the business that has employed me, but also the people that we employ, the people that we recruit. Every decision has to be done with an understanding of where we're heading towards and how we make that work in 3, 6, and 12 months' time.
And giving ourselves into the biggest risk that we can, or the biggest trap that we can fall into if we don't make the shifts that we need to and work in the space that we need to, is that we haven't done that thinking. And then we're 3 months down the line and actually we're having to have some really difficult conversations there because we haven't prepared and we haven't considered where we want to be and what some of the challenges that are going to be coming our way are. And I think we've talked quite a bit already, I think, about some of the tensions that exist, and I just wanted to just maybe explore that or delve into that a little bit further. So, you know, we've talked a bit about that tension that exists between day to day, feels comfortable, we know what we're doing, we get value, we can add value, and the more strategic, looking ahead, thinking about and setting the future up for future success, so setting the business up for future success. Sorry, sometimes it's referred to as perform and transform, like deliver and then transform, think about what's next. We've talked a bit about that. We've talked about the tension that exists around, you know, the discomfort of being ultimately accountable, but letting go of the how things are done and letting people have the opportunity to find their own ways of doing things. And I think I'm exploring the tensions because this is why so often we don't perhaps create the environment for people managers to thrive. But what other tensions do you feel exist for leadership teams?
I think one of those interesting tensions for me is the different styles that everyone brings to the room. And, externally, we have to present ourselves as a single unit. That's how that strategy is going to be most effectively felt. But we all come from different backgrounds. We all have different experiences. My role as chair, I think, when I chair our leadership meetings, is to try and ensure wherever possible that voices are heard, but we're pushing forward to reach a certain level of conversation. And there's a lot of work I try and do on trying to make sure that when we're building an agenda for meetings, I'm having conversations up front. Oh, that maybe could you just go and cover that off in your own team and then report back? And so I think that's an interesting tension, because we've done some work with people like you in terms of being in a room together and exploring relationships. But I think that's one of the healthiest things, and building that goodwill outside of a leadership meeting that allows you to come into that space and have challenging conversations and respectfully disagree. And I think if most leadership teams were honest, it'd be very unhelpful if they only ever met in that boardroom or in that meeting room, because that's where the friction and the resolution comes. So you need to make sure that you're engaging more widely to kind of enable that tension to be dissolved almost. But I also think about the kind of pull of everyone's own roles and own circumstances, and so you're trying to factor all that in. But when I chair our leadership meeting, what I try and do is give a framework for focus for us to kind of see longer term, and have that clarity over where I sense we all should be focused on. And there's a bit of ego there. There's a bit of me going, I'm chair, I think I know the way to get through this meeting. There's a bit of me going, I think that's going to be more valuable for us. But it's about doing that in a way that everyone else in that room feels like they've been heard and their voices have been recognised, even if I'm trying to balance some of that in the background.
And it sounds like one of the things that really is coming out here is that you at Audio always have a real focus on what is the purpose of these leadership team meetings, what is the purpose of, and what do we therefore need to discuss, and actually that is not to be dismissed as a small thing. A lot of organizations that we go to, actually the quality and the clarity around the purpose of meetings and what is being discussed is one of the biggest challenges, because it's all too easy to get sidetracked by what might feel urgent in the day-to-day, as opposed to what's really important in the future, and having that discipline to structure it. And I'm just going to pop into chat for those on who popped it into chat, because there's an article that I really resonated with me when I saw it when I was preparing for this, thinking about some of the challenges. And it talks about, I'm just looking down to sort of read them specifically, but it talks about these paradoxical expectations of leaders and leadership teams. So on the one hand, you need to be a strategic and then on the other hand, an executor. So both strategic, have bold, ambitious ideas as well as practical capabilities to put them into practice. You need to be tech savvy, but also a humanist, to be able to understand that whilst we need to align and upskill in terms of technology, probably even more prevalent for you guys, and organizations are all about the people, and it's the people that drive success. We need to have high integrity, but also be able to manage and navigate some of the dynamics and the politics that goes on in with an organization. We need to be humble and be able to have humility and admit when we get it wrong, whilst also it talks about being a humble hero, having the confidence to take real leaps of faith. We need to be both globally minded whilst also being locally minded, and we need to be a traditioned innovator, so think about and understand and know what's got what's been successful, what's helped us to get to where we are as an organization, but also be always looking ahead. So just having these tensions that exist pose many of the challenges that leadership teams face. I mean, picking up on one of the ones that you said there as well, I know from my experience that when you create a team, you want diversity in thinking, you want diversity in ideas, you want different strengths so that we can play to each other's strengths. But what comes with that is very different styles. And I said before around this need to be aligned towards common goals and aligned towards what's expected, and what a leadership team's purpose and role is. If we've got very different personalities with very different views, there's often a real inconsistency in how that is then both communicated and implemented as well. So it's managing. That's where I found some of the biggest tensions and the biggest challenges for me, is being able to both harness and utilize all of that whilst managing some of the issues that it inherently brings.
Yeah, and I think back to some of our earliest meetings, they really felt like they were being a space where people didn't feel like they had permission to speak to each other as colleagues through the week. And so it became this meeting point where everyone just did their day-to-day conversations. And it was so focused on the day-to-day challenges we were all facing. And then at one point we was like, none of this should all be happening. You should still all be talking to your peers and your colleagues outside this space, but this is where we focus on the longer term. And it was just as you were chatting there, I just pulled up our kind of guide to meetings document, which we spent a lot of time on at leadership level for a number of months as we framed this, and me and a colleague worked on it together to kind of structure it. And it goes into great detail on the frequency of the meetings, the purpose of the meetings, which is to make day-to-day decisions on content, teams and organizations, the agenda, a duration, it lists the example agenda for a meeting. So it just started to give us that kind of agreed shape that we'd all signed off on and held ourselves accountable to. And I think it's been so vital. I think you go into a meeting and you're like, we'll just do an agenda and we'll just have the meeting. But the agenda needs to be shaped by a shared agreement about what the space is for and what you're using your time together to be effective with. Yeah. I also know we broke one of our rules today, which is that we should never have a board meeting and a leadership meeting on the same day. And we did both today. So we've already broken our own rules, unfortunately.
But that intentionality behind and the rigor behind really thinking through maybe some of these things that we might actually just take for granted. We talk a lot about the work of Lencioni. So he's written 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, Death by Meeting, and there's one of his books which kind of its aim is to bring together a lot of his other work is around The Advantage of Organizational Health, I think is the title. And no, it's just called The Advantage. I've got it next to me. And it's all about organizational health and all about how we need to balance the skills and the clever things that business does with those really important factors that drive the health of an organization. So what can we do that helps people to feel valued and engaged and stay within an organization? But the reason that it came to mind as you were talking there is he, as he always does in his books, kind of quotes or talks about real life stories. And he talked about working with the leader of an organization who was the organization was hugely successful, and the culture and the organizational health of that company was greater than any other company that they'd seen. And when he asked that leader, why do you think that your competitors aren't doing the same? And this leader's response was, I think they probably think it's beneath them. And that way of that just to what you said there around, we might just make this assumption that meetings, that's just something that we do, or being in the office so we can just chat and see how somebody is. Why do these things really matter? Well, we can get into the nitty gritty of like this very clever data thing, but actually focusing on the basics, getting the basics right, I suppose, is where I'm coming to.
And I suppose, you know, one of the challenges that we recognise, and I'm sure many people on this call will recognise, is that you know, we are a founder-owned and led business. Our MD is our founder, and so you know, as we've grown a leadership team around that, there's a lot of personal relations there. There's a lot of proud. There's a lot of you know, imposter syndrome, and so actually a lot of this work's been really important to allow our founder and our leadership team, and that, you know, we all work very closely together, to know where we all can succeed together. And so I think that's another thing, that's it's an interesting challenge where the person who set up the business 11 years ago is the managing director, and how you build a leadership team around that one person.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm conscious we've only got about 9 minutes left. We could talk around this topic for a lot longer, I'm sure. So I'm gonna start to pull maybe together some of the things that we've been talking about into that final point around the practical things, the top tips for leadership teams to support their people managers within an organization to succeed and to thrive. So keep any questions coming through, but let me just set out what I feel are the top three, and I think we've made so many links to these as we've gone through. So the first one is give clarity. So helping people managers who work within your organization to be really, really clear on what's expected. That doesn't mean you have to define it, you know, and set it all out, but it means that there needs to be discussions around, as a group, as a leadership team, as a group of managers, defining what are the behaviours, what are the ways of working, how do we deliver, what do we expect of each other, and to keep reinforcing those through giving feedback. And you know, we know that the more senior you get, the less feedback that you receive. So helping to create an environment where you give feedback. So helping your people managers to be really clear on what's expected, helping them to define what good looks like for them in their role, especially if this is a shift from them being an individual contributor, where good looks like where success is very different to being a manager of people, and helping them to make sense of priorities as well, and helping them to think about, you know, what is my important versus what is my urgent, where can I delegate, where should I be focusing my time. So give clarity, number one. Number two, create space. We talk quite a lot about, for us, when we're part of a leadership team, to create the space for ourselves to really think about where do we need to be, but creating that space to support the shifts in how they work, to allow them to have space to reflect on the experiences that they've been through, to build capability and confidence. So we know, we talk a lot with teams around the importance of reflection, and we know that we have a real natural bias for action. If we remain unchecked, we'll just be thinking about what's the next thing, when actually the way that we grow and develop as adults is to learn from the experiences that we've had. So helping people, you know, helping your people managers to have a space to unpick maybe some of the challenging situations that they've encountered, and to take the learning from that, which will then inform future decisions, future actions. And it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be the one who creates that space every time. I've seen it work really, really well within organizations when, you know, peer groups come together and have a space to reflect and unpick situations, and really think about what shifts they're making, how they're doing, the progress they're making, and where they still need to put in effort. So give clarity, create space. And thirdly, and probably for me, the one that I feel most passionate about is role modeling. So if we think about what leadership teams can do to support people managers in their organizations to thrive, role modeling what's expected. So it's one thing setting out what's expected and being clear on what's expected, but it's as important, if not more important, to demonstrate what that looks like in practice through your actions. So if as a leadership team you expect your people managers to prioritize their one-to-ones, to give robust feedback, to regularly spend time with their teams having development conversations, to demonstrate vulnerability and create this idea of, we talk a lot about psychological safety, creating a space where people feel okay about saying that they don't know, that they don't know the answer. If we want that and we expect that of our people managers, then the only way we're going to get people to step up is if they see that in practice. Yes, it gives them permission, but it also allows them to see what we actually mean by that, and to see and recognize the importance of those behaviors. So clarity around role, expectations, space, and role modeling are the three for me. How do they land with you, Paul? Anything missing from there?
No, I think what we've talked through today really kind of reflects particularly the space and the clarity point there. I think, and that it's almost about kind of creating the clarity at the start of a lot of things. And I think it's so much easier to kind of set the direction, set the destination, but then allow people to have the space to find their own way through that project. And I scribbled down as we were talking, the power of kickoff calls and framing and being able to set expectations right from the start rather than expecting to pivot because you've changed your mind over something is so vital. And also tools, we kind of touched on this briefly today, but that kind of giving people, just not presuming that someone will have the full confidence, making sure that you've had that conversation to go, do you know how you're going to do that? Great, I'll leave you to it. Or, well, why don't you consider these things? Why don't you look at these? What models have I learned from that have made my life easier? How can I share them? How do I spend time? And I suppose this is where the role model comes in. How do I spend the time? How do I share my experiences to make it easier for them to achieve what they're looking to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a lot about how we, although we often focus on investing in development of your people managers and supporting and really thinking as a leadership team how you function, how you work, how you collaborate, how you deliver for your organization, allows your people managers to not only be productive, but really it's a strategic move in itself, because focusing on how we work as a leadership team enables the organization, the rest of the business to really deliver what's expected of them. So thank you for joining us. Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing your experiences. And I don't know if we're going to be talking about Girls Aloud on any of our webinars coming up, so that was definitely a highlight. And if there's any other questions that come up, I think we've covered a lot of the ones that have been shared as we've been going through. What's your favourite leadership podcast? You said high performance podcast, maybe not the one for you. Do you have any podcasts that kind of touch on some of the areas we've been talking about?
I think one of the things that I try and do is listen very broadly, because I think that's all about that kind of lived experience. And so we have a great podcast called Different with Nikki Campbell that explores people who have real differences in how they approach the world around them. I think that's a great way of starting to understand how you view the world. So I'm afraid to say right now I'm just politics and news obsessed. There's an election up. So if it's not the news agent or Sky News podcast, my listening is fairly limited at this point.
Yeah, fair enough. You've got such a broad range of things to listen to, but yes, that sounds like the Nicky Campbell one, an interesting one for us to think about as well. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us as well, whether you're joining us live or you're listening back. And the next few CAPE conversations, so our next one that we've got is around the future of work and what managers need to know about AI. I'm just going to look across, I've got my list here, thinking about remote working, thinking about navigating change and uncertainty, and thinking about neurodiversity and what's coming up for the rest of 2024. So we'll see you very soon.